When I got injured and left the military, to add to the pressure, Alana was 8 months pregnant. So I was like, is there enough work? How am I going to support my family? So Alana had gone from being, going all around the world, traveling. She had aspirations of doing other careers. So all of a sudden, I'm injured and not doing the job that I was supposed to be doing. And now she's just had a baby. And so, she went through an identity crisis as well. But we just, you just deal with the hand that's dealt you and you just keep moving forward, don't dwell on it. For us, it was like, for me, yes, I can no longer work in the special forces. I'm now working in the private security sector, but how can I be the best within that industry?
Hello, beautiful people. On today's podcast, we have the incredible Dean Stott. Dean was a former soldier in the British Special Forces until a parachuting accident which abruptly ended his career in the military. Not one to hold himself back, he reinvented himself as an entrepreneur, motivational speaker, and record-breaking adventurer. He worked in private security for 5 years and in 2016 broke 2 world records when he became the fastest person to cycle the Pan-American Highway, which stretches 14,000 miles in 99 days, cycling on average 10 hours per day. Dean is the author of the book Relentless and is the new directing staff on SAS Australia. What I personally love about this conversation is the power and impact of Dean's self-belief and confidence. He's the kind of guy that knows what he wants and gets after it. And if there are any haters that come into his way, which there inevitably always are, he simply uses this as fuel to his fire. Though his resume per se comes across as quite intimidating, Dean is such a well-rounded person. In that, yes, he is tough, but he can also see the strength in vulnerability. In this conversation, he talks about the experience of his father not initially supporting him in his dream of being in the military. He speaks about the challenges of an identity crisis, both for himself and his wife Alana when he left the military, and also of what it is like having broken 2 world records and fundraised over $1 million, to be asked more about how the canapes were at Prince Harry's wedding, then of his significant achievements both personally and philanthropically. We also get insight into what it is like to be the new directing staff on the popular television series SAS Australia. Please enjoy this powerful yet humbling conversation with the incredible Dean Stott. Welcome to the podcast, Dean.
Oh, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So, Dean, where I want to start is with a quote from your book, Relentless. And you shared, and then without even thinking, I said, I'll join the army. My dad scoffed. The army? You wouldn't last 2 minutes. And something in those words, something in his tone, hit my pride like a hammer. And I knew in that moment that I would prove him wrong. I'd join the army, I'd become a soldier, and I'd be a great one. So where I want to start, Dean, is for you to share more in your younger years and what you believe influenced you to develop such a strong sense of self-belief and self-confidence.
Yeah, so my father was in the military. I grew up in a military town called Aldershot, which was at the time was the home of the British Army. So everywhere you looked, there were soldiers. You looked in the sky and there were guys parachuting. The vehicles were the roads were full of military vehicles. So I was very much immersed in that environment. But my father was also in the military, as I touched on, but his career he was what we call a tracksuit soldier. So rather than wearing the uniforms, he would wear tracksuit, and he was the army football manager, player, and coach. So all I knew of the military through my father was sport, was competition, was striving to be the best you could be. My father, he was my mentor. I always looked up to my father. My parents split up when I was 8 years old, and we went to live with my mother in Manchester. And eventually my father got custody of us. And the reason he got custody is because the judge didn't want to split the siblings up. I had to make the decision at the age of 10 who we live with, and I was very much pulled towards my father. So yeah, he was my mentor, and so I lived in that environment. My dad was very strict. He was a Scotsman. He was a sergeant major. I couldn't just come back from school and go play with my friends. He wanted, I think, better for me than what he had as a young child. So education was really key to him. So he made sure that I'd done my homework and everything before I went out and played with my friends, and which was fine. And I got good grades at school. But going on to college, I didn't really like college. I thought I'd done all my education. Further education didn't sort of attract to me. I always wanted to be a fireman. But my father used to take us away as a young boy and young kids on summer holidays to Newquay surfing. So I just loved surfing. And that's probably where my love for the water started as a young child. So I went on a 2-week surfing holiday with my friends, which turned out to be 6 months in the end. And my father came looking for me and found me working in a surf shop. And as you've put in there, the quote, he wasn't impressed at the fact that I'd ruined my education. And so I just silenced him and told him I would join the army. And yeah, I was expecting some more warm, comforting words rather than you would last 2 minutes. But I think now, looking back in reflection, we never really talked about what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted to be a fireman, but at the age of 17, you couldn't get a job like that. And so he just assumed I would make a decision at a later age going through further education, but I didn't fancy that. So you can argue with someone till you're blue in the face, I always say, or you can actually actions speak louder than words. And there's no point in me arguing with my father, telling him, well, I will last longer than 2 minutes. The best thing to do is just go away and do it and prove him wrong. And so that's what I did. I went and I joined the military, and obviously over the years and became very successful and got into the UK Special Forces. But there was a common theme with what my father has said with other sort of hurdles in life, where I was again met with that sort of opposition that told you couldn't do it for certain reasons, and then again ignore them, just go away, prove them wrong, and then come back to the table, and not with an arrogant smile or thing like that. Just say, look, things are possible. It's not all black and white, and that's the problem we have nowadays. People just say, they'll tell you why you can't do things rather than why you can.
Yeah, it's definitely a theme I noticed in your book and in your story and in your achievements that you've done, is like this sort of like motivation through sort of negativity, through people sort of having that pushback and that resistance to you wanting to do things in your life. And I think this is like a really interesting mindset, because I think like for some people it can be a huge motivator, and that's sort of what gets them to the end. And I think for some it can be unsustainable, and it can actually kind of like burn some people out because they're kind of being that sort of negatively motivated. Can you talk more about how that has worked for you in your life? Because I know that you've done it in a way and you've utilized it in a way that hasn't burnt you out and has actually really fueled you in a healthy way to sort of achieve the achievements that you have achieved.
Yeah, words are quite powerful. The fact I still talk about what my father said 26 years onwards, right. It's still ingrained in there somewhere. And going back to that, in reflection, I think it was reverse psychology from my father. He knows, we were very competitive as a family. He was obviously very high in the sporting arena, even to the Christmas Day when we got the ball game out, it was competition and you had to win. And what I did like about my father growing up is that he didn't let me win because I was younger. You had to win. You had to win fair and square. And that's what I liked. And so he knew I had that competitive drive. But yeah, as I said, words are quite powerful. And it's what we do with those words straight away, because some people would just dwell on those words and let them, compartmentalize it, just push it aside and just say, right, no, ignore that, use that, try and use that as a fire. It's easier said than done. Don't get me wrong. Right. I wasn't happy when my dad said that to me. When I decided to go join the Special Boat Service rather than the SAS, I was the first Army candidate to do so. And again, I had people messaging me, saying, what are you doing? have you thought about this? I think you're making the wrong decision. And again, that was tapping away, but I just thought, no, ignore them. And what I didn't want to do, I didn't want to fail and then give him that satisfaction of saying, I told you so. And so that was my drive, and that was my fire. But I think people say it, there's two types of people. There's those that support you, who know that they couldn't do it themselves. They want to wish you all the best. And there's those who probably could do it if they put their hearts and minds to it. But what they don't want to do is see you succeed, because you then make them look like they belong in the other group. And so that's where I really, over the years, I've really identified those sort of people. And because a lot of guys telling me I couldn't do it, who weren't even in the special forces. And it's like, okay. And so, yeah, just go prove them wrong. And then with the bike ride as well, again, at the age of 40, we did a SWOT analysis, the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and threats. And the only weakness was my arrogance towards the cycling community. That I thought I was going to go cycle the world's longest road and break world records, having only cycled 20 miles. But again, I'd had years of experience of being told I couldn't and proven them wrong. So I just did that to drive me on. But it's that initial phase when you're met with opposition is what you do with that information, and that's key.
And going into the military and having this form of mindset, like obviously, as you said, it's not always easy. What was sort of the mindset that you pulled on when you were sort of having those days, maybe that you were questioning a little bit about, your capacity, or having like a little bit of self-doubt? What was it that sort of pulled you back to your center and being really like strong in what you believe in?
I think I had a lot of self-pride as well. When I joined the military, I saw that these guys weren't supermen. They were just young boys as well. I was 17 and a half. They were 17 and a half. I think the eldest in our group was 20. So straight away, you were amongst friends who were all going through the same issues, same heartaches and the same pains as you. And so that initial bond with them, that sort of helped. And again, with that competitive drive, I was one of the fittest through training, and I soon identified that quite early. And then, I wanted to stay there. I didn't want to creep down. I always wanted to be the one that was at the front, but also helping the other guys as well. And then that was it. I think once I realized that I was physically capable and I was achieving the aims, then it was like, well, what was next? So our basic training is only 10 weeks. I finished that, and then I went on to the next phase 2 training. I wouldn't look beyond that. I didn't see a career in the special forces or the commando forces and things. All I wanted to do was get to the end of this course, but do as well as I could to get to the end. And then at the age of 17 and a half joining, I was about 67 kilos and 5'7". So, half the man I was today. But by the age of 21, I was 90 kilos. I was 5'11". I'd grown physically, but I'd also, what was more powerful, I'd grown mentally. I was like, well, I can achieve that. So what is next? So it's just taking those small steps, chipping away at the iceberg, and that's what I did. And then I just looked towards the next course and see what was achievable.
And you talk about having these strong bonds through going through adversity and hardship. And, I know that comradeship, particularly in the military, is so important. But, what I find is that it's so important in our daily lives as well. And I think it's a big missing part for a lot of people in their lives to have that sort of strong sense of community. Can you share more about what that was like in your experience in the military and how you've sort of been able to develop that in sort of, quote unquote, civilian life? Yeah.
So, there is no comparison, I don't think, to the military, that sort of comradeship, just purely because the experiences that they put you under, the places they take you to and sort of the situations you see, you can't experience that in the corporate world. I do a lot of speaking in the corporate sector, and a lot of them really look at leadership from the military and they understand, sorry, my 5-year-old has just come in now. Can you hear it?
Yeah. We were talking about sort of like the bonds and comradeship, and sort of like, because where I was sort of going with it was, I feel like a lot of mental health challenges in the sense of like anxiety and depression sort of come from the sense of isolation and a lack of connection with other people and having that sense of community. And I know that, you know, you shared, obviously there's a difference in the sense of like, you know, the experiences that you have in the military. Like these are certainly very far from what we experience in daily life. But I think there is conscious choices that we can make in our own life. You know, I know in my own life, I love ultramarathon running, and that's my sort of sense of overcoming adversity. And I love the multi-stage because you get to connect with people over, you know, 5-7 days. And that's really fulfilling to me. And I feel like that is an aspect of what keeps my mental health very centered. But I feel like for a lot of us, as you shared, you know, in the corporate setting, which I've also, you know, done in my life, I've lived that life, and I had anxiety and depression throughout that stage of my life, is that sort of lack of overcoming hardship together and working together. So I'd love to know more about like, how do you, as someone that obviously has those intensive experiences with, you know, people that are, you know, friends become family, bring that sort of into the daily life to be able to kind of help with, I guess, like your sense of center and mental health. Yeah,
I think obviously in life, you know, there's a great quote, you can't be experienced without experiences. So, you know, from what we've experienced in our time in the military, you know, it's very transferable to the civilian sector. You know, there's certain things, you know, we hopefully won't see in the corporate and civilian world that we have seen there. But as human beings, as human nature, we like to be part of a tribe. You know, we like to be part of a group, and whether that's people who share the same likes, whether it's ultra marathon running or whether it's, you know, cycling and things like that. So yeah, I think mental health, being part of a group or an organization is key. And obviously with the current situation with COVID, you know, that's really sort of split these tribes up. And thankfully, there's like some virtual meetings and things like that, but it's nothing like meeting someone in person. But regarding mental health and the tribal influence, you know, it's an identity crisis. You know, when I can only use my own personal experience as an example, when I did 16 years in the military and then had the parachute accident, and then I had to leave all I ever known. That's all I'd ever known was that military community. I was going through an identity crisis. You know, where do I now fit in society? Who is my new tribe? Who can I relate to? And what, you know, the skill sets I have, you know, what can I do to help society? So, and that doesn't have to just be in the military, that doesn't have to be in sport, that could be in any line of work. If you're working with other people and then that's taken away from you, or you have to separate because of COVID, then of course it's going to affect your mental health. So for me, communication, staying in touch with people, whatever means, whether that's virtually like this, whether it is actually trying to, you know, see them in person, I think that's paramount for your mental health. Could I still communicate with all my friends from the special forces? You know, I'm not there with them at night, jumping out the planes and the helicopters, but I still feel I am part of that group. And I think that's one of the advantages of social media and the advanced technology. I sort of, again, look at my father when he left the military after 22 years. You know, that was it. He cut communications and all ties from people, and it must have really affected his mental health. So yeah, that's all I would say, you know, to people is communication, stay in touch with these tribes, these groups.
And you shared that you went through an identity crisis, and I think this is so important to talk about because, you know, it's very real coming out of the military. I'm sure, you know, most of the audience is Australian, and you know, there's several people that are popping up in my head right now that have truly experienced that just in the military. But obviously this happens, as you shared, sort of in, you know, sport, in high performance sport. It can even happen just from, you know, having children and then your children leaving a home. I think most of us will experience it at least once in our life. What kind of helped you the most in moving through that sense of crisis?
Yeah, so in my book, my identity crisis, you know, as a touch on as a young boy growing up in the military and in 16 years in the military, I had no aspirations of leaving the military. That was me. I was a lifer, a career soldier all the way through. And then the life-changing injury, the parachute incident, meant my direction in life had suddenly switched. And as you've touched on there's a lot of synergies between the special forces and high performance athletes, that you've gone from you've been spending years to get to the top of your game in performance, and then all of a sudden that's taken away from you. It's a bit like a cricketer. I saw my friends go to Afghanistan and I had to have an operation and rehab. It was like a cricketer watching their friends go to the Ashes, but they're staying back to have physio. There's a lot of common ground there. But for me, what was really difficult was the fact that I'd gone from, my physical attributes got to me where I was in the military. I couldn't even run 100 meters without my knee collapsing. So for me, it was that sort of, that identity, that was me. I was always the fittest. I was always the fastest, the strongest. And now I couldn't even do the basics. Also within the military are like your mother and father. They clothe you, they feed you, they pay you on time. It's almost like your little family. They deal with all those sort of bills, the heating bills, the gas bills, so you can focus on your job. But I wasn't aware who was paying the gas or the heating. I was just doing the job that I loved.
Right.
Thankfully for me, I had a wife, Alana, who was very entrepreneurial. She worked as a bank manager for a few years, and so those sort of worries that I had, she sort of picked them up. I still don't know who we bank with, or who does the gas or the heat. She sort of picked that up for me. But I do look at a lot of people when they transition. Their transition can be quite smooth or turbulent, and it all depends on that support network. So for me, I was very fortunate. I had that support network that some people don't. And as you touched on there, I just mentioned that the special forces and the sporting arena, but as you rightly touched on there, women who had careers or had lives, and all of a sudden they're like, and Alana was a perfect example of this. So when I got injured and left the military, to add to the pressure, Alana was 8 months pregnant. So I was like, is there enough work? How am I going to support my family? So Alana had gone from being, going all the way around the world, traveling. She had aspirations of doing other careers. So all of a sudden I'm injured and not doing the job that I was supposed to be doing. And now she's just had a baby. And so, she went through an identity crisis as well. But we just, you just deal with the hand that's dealt you, and you just keep moving forward, don't dwell on it. For us, it was like, for me, yes, I can no longer work in the special forces. I'm now working in the private security sector, but how can I be the best within that industry? And that's where my focus was. And Alana being Alana, she just juggled everything, juggled being a mother, running businesses and everything else. So we didn't let it hold us back.
Yeah, actually, I wrote here because I thought it was very beautiful at the start of your book. You said in relation to Alana, there is no hero without her. And I thought that was just such a beautiful dedication to your wife, because throughout your story, she's certainly at the forefront of, of your achievements and helping you to sort of achieve everything you had. And you sound like an incredible team to kind of pull everything together and to get to where you guys are today.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like you said, there is no hero without her. Alana, anyone who knows us knows that Alana's the brains. Alana runs all the organizations, does all the fundraising, runs the charities, runs the businesses. But we know our strengths and weaknesses. That's the thing, I have certain strengths that she doesn't have. I'm more sociable than Alana. I'm happy to be out the front doing the talking. But when it comes to doing sort of business and corporate stuff, Alana deals with all the contracts, invoices, and things like that. So as a couple, we sort of knew our strengths and weaknesses. And also I wanted to get that in the book as well, because there's lots of people I know, celebrities, who they're there at the front. They're the face. But I know for a fact, if it wasn't for those in the shadows behind them, that support network, they wouldn't be there as well. So I do think a lot more people should give credit to those around them that have supported them. And it's a bit like, an example for the special forces. For every special forces operator to step off a helicopter, it takes 7 other military personnel to get them there.
Wow.
It's a team that you don't see. They see us doing the spear end of the work, but actually, if it wasn't for that whole team working in sync, then it wouldn't happen. And that's no different whether you're in the military, whether you're at home, whether you're in a corporation. Everyone from the cleaner upwards has a role within that team, and they should be praised for it as well.
And you shared you went into private security, and I'd love to learn more about your mindset in this, because as you said, you know, you were in the special forces, you were used to being at the top. You had this parachuting accident that sort of changed the trajectory of your life. You went into private security, but very quickly you start moving to the top of this space. I think, you know, you were known as like the guy that would get like any job done, no matter how dangerous, something along those lines, which I thought was really cool. Can you share more about like, how does your mindset sort of overcome that part of your life, which is a huge sort of adversity and hardship, to kind of be like, okay, well, now this is my path, and now I'm going to make the best of this path?
Yeah, so as we touched on, I didn't plan on leaving the military. So normally you would have a lead up to leaving the military. You'd have a whole transition period where you'd be doing job interviews and CVs and doing that whole process. I didn't have that. It was like straight out. And you know, people, without sounding like Liam Neeson, people, our skill sets, our natural progression is the private security industry. And the security industry is so diverse as well. You know, when I used to tell people I worked in security, I think they thought I was a doorman from Club Tropicana. But in fact, it's everything from surveillance, close protection, consulting, coaching, and mentoring. So for me, when I got out, a lot of my friends, being SBS, all had their maritime security companies, and they were cleaning up on the east coast of Africa because of piracy. I didn't want to sort of be competing with them for the same clients. And also, I didn't want to be going out to Afghan and Iraq doing 6 weeks rotation, 6 weeks back. You know, so again, and credit to Alana. Alana didn't put me under pressure to say, right, we need work and we need this and that. So I took the risk and did ad hoc. I just remained as a freelancer, ready to go for when the phone went. And thankfully for me, the phone went within 48 hours. And I was out in Libya helping set up one of the projects with the British embassy in Benghazi. And then I soon realized that, you know, looking at these other security companies who very successful, you know, billion-dollar companies were charging 6-7 figure sums of crisis management evacuation plans, when actually, when you scrape the surface, there was nothing there. So that's what I did. I came back, Alana gave birth to our daughter Molly, and I said, right, I've got a plan. I think there's a niche. I'm trying to find a niche within the industry. And we lived in Aberdeen, which was the oil and gas capital of Europe. So we had exposure to the oil and gas sector. And so I bought 30 weapons on the black market, and I buried them between Tunis and Egypt, and just spent a month designing my own evacuation plans, buried communications kits and money should we need it. And that's what I did. That was my my role within Libya. But each phone call I got, I was meeting new people, new cultures, whether it's taking the UAE royal family super yacht from Barcelona to Maldives, training the Kurdish special forces in Erbil to fight ISIS, you know, working at the Brazil World Cup. Every job was unique. And from that, I was learning more about the corporate sector. I was learning more about relationships with individuals. And my profile was really starting to grow, rather than just doing the one static job and not really building on that CV. What I want to do was build on that CV. And so yeah, that was it. And then the jobs would then start to get a little bit more dangerous. And for that, I work on my own. I find it easier to work on my own because it's one person I've got to look after rather than a team. And I know how I come across when I'm in some of these places. So the American ambassador got killed in Benghazi. I was there that night, safely got an oil company back to Tripoli. 2 years later, I'm in Brazil doing the World Cup. And I get a phone call from the Canadian embassy saying that they're now stuck in Tripoli, and so successfully got them out, you know, single-handedly, 18 military and 4 diplomats. So I then became the guy to go to if there's a situation. And so really, it wasn't so much that, it was problem solving. And the problem was quite simple, is a lot of these Western security companies had this Western mentality, thinking they can go in heavy-handed and do what they want in these countries.
Right.
When in fact, the problem was actually lack of respect and communication. And so that's what I did. I just got myself embedded with the locals, understand the demographics, the politics, the tribal influences, showed a bit of respect, just was very transparent in communication, what I was doing. And literally all the jobs I had done, the success, you know, it wouldn't have been successful if it wasn't for that local influence. And so it wasn't really a big problem at all. It was just the mindset.
I think it's such an important aspect that as you're sharing, a lot of the sort of those larger companies overlook. I know that you did this for about 5 years, and I'm really interested because obviously as you're sharing, you went to lots of different countries, Libya, Somalia, Yemen. So and in between this, you're coming home. It might be for a few days, it might be for a few weeks, but then you're kind of like heading back out, right? Mm-hmm. But I know that in your book, you kind of shared this underlying feeling of like being addicted to this like adrenaline and excitement. And when you didn't have that in your life, you kind of get this irritability and you wouldn't feel, like yourself, I guess. Can you share more about that? Because I think a lot of us can kind of relate to that, whether it is more of that sort of high danger or, getting out doing something adventurous without sort of that stimulation. It can be quite an uncomfortable experience for some of us.
Yeah, it is. So for me, it's probably a mixture of things actually. So when I got out, literally was working straight away, and then Alana would be running back a house. So Alana would be planning my next job, taking the phone calls. You say a few days, a few weeks. There's a couple of occasions where it was a few hours. I'd land in the morning, grab my bag, and then I'm off again. So for me, I was enjoying the work. For me, I felt like I was filling a void. Physically, I wasn't doing anything because I was just so focused on the work. And so it was when I came back from the Canadian embassy, evacuating that, my normal, as you touched on there, I'd wash my clothes, pack my bag ready for the next phone call. And Alana then highlighted I'd only been home like 21 days in a 365-day calendar.
Wow.
But what it was Alana thought I wanted to go away to fill that void. I was still thinking I needed to go away so we could earn money. And in fact, financially, we're in a great position. We didn't need to. So there was an element of me trying to match that adrenaline rush and, that identity thing again. What is my role? Where I'm no longer in that group. What is my role within society? And I've now then become one of the top within the security industry. So again, I felt, but to stay at the top, you needed to keep going. You needed to stay current. You needed to keep going out. And that's what I did. But then it soon became apparent it was actually lack of communication between me and Alana. Mm-hmm. She said, you don't need to do this. You are taking risks. And chapter 16 in the book, it's called Dead or Divorced. And this was this is the stage we are in that. But I do think, there's a great analogy that your body's like a river. It needs to keep flowing. Mm-hmm. As soon as it stops, it gets stagnant. There's illness and disease. So you do need to keep flowing. But what's important is the control of the flow. And for me, my flow was like full on torrent. And so, and I still don't get the balance right sometimes. It's just I need to do something, or people need to do something, or something to strive for or to aim for. But also have that balance as well, that one isn't, overshadowing the other. And that's what the problem is. My work was so much my main effort, and I had a young family. And I'd only spent 21 days at home. I was away more as a civilian than I was when I was in the military, and I didn't need to be.
And so I guess this takes us to like the next really big transition in your life. So you kind of realize, because I think there was a moment that you share with Alana where, she's cleaning your clothes and there's blood on your clothes. And you were like, it just needs a wash kind of thing. And she's like, this isn't normal. Like, this is not normal, Dean. And it's kind of like a strong moment for you guys, as you said in the chapter. It's sort of, dead or divorce, where you're having to make that decision. And it's, she's kind of showing you the mirror of where you are in your life. But I thought it was really cool. I didn't know this about your story. She kind of, around this time period throws a book at you, Guinness World Records. And I feel like this is just such a cool part that just, it almost sounds fiction how awesome it is and where it takes you. But, she just says, like, pick something. Can you share more about that part of your life?
Yes. Yeah. So back to the shirt incident. Yeah. One of my shirts was covered in blood. So Alana was washing it and asked how there was blood in there. And I sort of told her, and it was like, it was almost a throwaway comment. So that discussion we had over 2 bottles of wine, I had disconnected from society. My dad had passed away that year. I buried him and was out the next day. I didn't even come to terms or mourn my father's death. It was just so focused on on the work. So Alana rightly said, hang up your security boots. Alana was a property developer, and she said, look, you come do property development with me, fine. So as you rightly touched on, that was 5 years in the security sector. My injured leg now was 2 kilos lighter than my good leg because of the muscle wastage. I'd neglected my own physical well-being because I was so fixated on the work. And so I just bought a push bike, a cyclocross push bike, which is like a gravel tire off Amazon, some Batman Lycra, thinking it was cool, and it's not cool. And just cycled to and from the office, probably 8 miles there, but 8 miles back. But actually being physically active again, getting that cardiovascular going through, I just felt like there's a huge weight off my shoulders, and it wasn't hurting my knee, which was always was hindering me before. So you can imagine my backstory, sat in these architects and planners meetings. I'm not really interested in any of the drawings. Alana was sort of running the meetings anyway. And yeah, she could see that glaze in the eyes. You need to do something. And so I said, well, I've always fancied, as a young boy, I used to always read Guinness World Records. And I said, as a young boy, I've always fancied doing a world record. And she said, well, what in? I said, well, cycling seems good because it's not hampering my knee. And so Alana, rightly threw the Guinness Book of Records at me. I was actually looking originally Cairo to Cape Town. But I'd been all over Africa in the private security sector. So I wanted to go somewhere that I hadn't really been to before, something that was going to be new. So then when I'm on the challenge, you're seeing new sites and it sort of distracts you. So yeah, Lana then found the world's longest road, which runs from southern Argentina to northern Alaska. It's called the Pan American Highway. It's 14,000 miles. So it's the equivalent, because of the curvature of the earth, it's the equivalent of cycling from London to Sydney and then another 4,000 miles.
Wow.
It's that far. So I was like, perfect. So having only cycled less than 20 miles, I applied for the world record. Sounds quite arrogant, but for me, I knew I had the endurance mentally. I knew I had the mental capacity and the endurance from my time in the special forces. I had strong legs when I was in the military, so I just needed to work on that. So I just wasn't a cyclist. So yeah, that's it. We applied for the world record, and Guinness came back 6 weeks later, said you've been successful on your application. So that was it. Then that was my focus was away from the security and on this new project.
It's interesting because I've heard you say before, that it comes across as quite arrogant, but to someone like me, it doesn't. I feel like as you're sharing, you've been through so much and achieved so much already and have such a headstrong mindset that it's like, it makes sense to me that whatever you choose, like I do believe that you can achieve it. And I think, when you say it comes across as arrogant, I know you shared in your book that, the people that were kind of saying that were the people in the cycling community. And to me, reading that, I was like, I feel like that's just a reflection of their own insecurity. It wasn't anything to do with you and your decision.
Yeah, it wasn't so much those. So my sponsored marketing team, they're the ones that said, it can come across arrogant. But I don't think it was that. I think it was more those that do this for a living have been, they're on, they have a platform or a presence for doing these ultra bike rides, and they've been doing it since they were young boys or girls. But then for a 40-year-old guy who's only cycled 20 miles to then say, and then it's not even like a small one, it's like the world's longest road, right, and then break the world record is almost like, I don't think it come across arrogance. It's almost like, well, who is this person? It's like maybe one of them joining the special forces at the age of 40. Is that, it's too late, but it's never too late. And I was trying to promote to people that it was never too late to start a sport, but also be good at a sport as well. But for me, with the challenge, it wasn't so much the physical bit, it was actually the planning and the execution. And that's where I had experience on my time in the military, in the private security sector. So I just took a military set of orders, put it on here and just crossed out ammunition. And then as I evolved as a cyclist, I introduced that into the plan. So a lot of these other athletes and cyclists, they will have a team that does that for them. Me and Alana did a lot together. We sat down. And a key one there, as I mentioned, Alana, is also having your partner still involved as well. That's key in some of these, in the success of some of these, because especially when you're doing something and your partner doesn't feel like they're involved in it. We did it as a family. So she could understand that I needed to go off to Dubai to do some heat training. I needed to go to Thailand to do some, CrossFit training. It wasn't because I wanted to go on holiday. There was a purpose, which she was part of.
And as you shared, I mean, you go from cycling 20 miles and coming up with this idea or this goal of what you want to achieve, and you essentially achieve it. You in the end get 2 world records. So, it is possible. What helped you in the training leading up to this achievement? So I've actually written here, I loved in your book, you said, train how you intend to fight. And I love this mindset, because I think it is so important. When you get on the race day, you know that you've done all the preparation. I know preparation and planning is so important to you. I think you also said, it was grit, determination, and careful preparation that got you to the end. Can you share more about that mindset, please?
Yeah, so I'll talk about, I'll split it into 2. So the first one, I've been very fortunate in the military to work in the desert, the Arctic, the jungle, all these amazing places. But I've never done it on a bike. And so I was going to be passing through literally every climate. It went from plus 47 degrees centigrade in the Atacama Desert to minus 18 degrees centigrade in Alaska, and everything in between. So again, as a soldier, I've done that, but I've never done it on a bike. So for me, I didn't want to take the gamble on the challenge. I knew I could cycle, 100 mile after 100 mile each day and things like that. But have I done it in heat? And I didn't want to take that gamble. So I sort of tried to replicate those sort of situations and temperatures before I went out, so I wasn't taking a risk. So I flew out to Dubai for 2 weeks in the summer, did some heat training there. My friend had a gym out in Thailand, which was 100% humidity, which matched Central America. Cycling is not safe in Thailand, but just being in those sort of temperatures helped. And I was doing CrossFit for 2 weeks. The biggest climbs on the Tour de France range between 21 and 23 kilometers. The biggest climb I had was 67 kilometers from sea level to 4,500 meters. So the only way to sort of replicate that was I found a room in London, which is at altitude. And I just did a 10-hour static watt bike session for 10 hours that I could, before training wise, that I could cope in those situations. But there's things that are, those sort of things I could factor, and I was comfortable before going into it. Yeah, I'm going to be happy when I get it. But there's things that are out of your control, be it natural disasters, coups, third-party influence. So you just needed to roll with what happens on the ground. You had the best plan in the world. As we say in the military, it doesn't survive first contact. And so for me, the success of this challenge was A, having a plan, but B, being reactive and changing the plan, not being too upset, if certain things happen and you need to change. So that was one. And then going back to your original question, what motivated, kept you going? So as well as the challenge, I wanted to do it for a charity. So to reflect the enormity of the challenge, I wanted to do raise £1 million for mental health for a campaign called Heads Together. So obviously Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry and I have been good friends for 14 years, and we've done a lot in the charity sector together. And so I rang him up, told him about my challenge, and that was it. We had the campaign and we had the challenge. So going into that, I would meet, there was 11 charities who would be recipients of the money. And for example, I'll give you one in Place to Be. And the £100,000 that they would get would enable 14,000 children to go into step-in clinics at schools and speak to counsellors. So I knew that every mile that I was pedaling, a child would go speak to someone. And that's only one of the 11 charities. So the impact of where the money was going was massive. And so that would also help when the days were hard as well, so I had that sort of as a motivator. Also had a motivator. My wife told me she'd divorce me if I didn't do it. So that was number 2 motivator. And number 3 was that SWOT analysis, the arrogance towards the cycling community. And as I'd done before, was that, let's just prove it wrong.
Was there any point throughout that time, because you were cycling for over 3 months, that's a long time to be out there day in, day out. Was there any time that you sort of got any sense of imposter syndrome? Like, did any people's voices start to show up in your head. Particularly, I find in endurance like this, you become heavily fatigued. You're not thinking as straight as you normally do.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of energy to keep that really strong mindset. Do you remember any moments throughout there where you kind of faltered a little bit and started questioning while you were out there?
So the world record was 117 days. I was aiming for 110, and it wasn't because I wanted to smash it by a week. When we'd done the planning, Alana and I, we looked at things that are out of control, as I mentioned, natural disasters and coups. So should we encounter them, we would eat into that 7 days that we had. I call it fudge. So I was aiming for the 110. I think my worst position I was in on this challenge, I was 39 miles behind on the first week, but I'm still a week ahead of the world record. From then on, I was always ahead. I was always ahead of the game. So really, nothing really affected me that. What did affect me was, when you talk about the noise, we had a support team with us who volunteers, pro bono volunteers, wanted to do it because of the mental health thing. But it soon became apparent that they had hidden agendas. And so, I'd come off the bike and I'd just be met with, right, we need to, there's social media saying this, and, day 13, the medics bullying the documentary team. It's like, this is mental health campaigns. So actually the bike ride was easy. When I say the challenge behind the challenge, it was dealing with egos, and that was the problem. So thankfully for me, I had Alana, the medic got sent home day 13, the medic and the soft tissue therapist, came down with another contract when I was in Mexico, saying I couldn't do it without them. I cycled off, left them in Mexico, and carried on with my friends. So that's what I wasn't expecting. Those were the curveballs. But actually, when I came back and spoke to a few people about it, it's very commonplace in that arena. I was like, really? So for us, a slight bit of naivety thinking we needed all that support network. In fact, it was, just me and Alana with a good plan in the end.
So something that I'm really interested in, and I've spoken to a lot of sort of high performers on this podcast, is, you're on the podcast because you have achieved such amazing feats in your life. But there's a period after working towards something, like this was an achievement that you essentially spent about 2 years of your life working towards. And then sort of, you get up the next day and you're so used to this routine of going out and doing these really difficult, particularly endurance related things, and you no longer need to. And there can be a sense of sort of like loneliness or emptiness or lack of purpose. What was your experience kind of coming to the end of such a big goal in your life?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So sort of rewinding again, when Harry and I chatted and he said, would I do it for mental health? I said, yes, of course. He then introduced me to the Royal Foundation. And the two questions I got from them was, how much are you looking to raise? And so I said £1 million. And then second one, what was the message you're trying to promote? So for me, I didn't really have a message at that point. Just because Harry told me to come in, I didn't really think about it. And then 4 minutes later, I sort of looked at myself and I said, well, physical activity helps your mental state. They said, oh, no, you can't use that. I said, well, why not? And I said, because it's not being scientifically proven. I said, but that's fine, but I don't need a scientist to tell me that I feel good when I'm training. Right. And this is 2016, and now 2021, 5 years later, very much recognized as one of the coping mechanisms. So fast forward then towards the end of the challenge, I'd spoken to previous people, sporting personalities and other people that had done challenge, and they said, you will go into depression. Because you have had such a big high, and then all of a sudden, as you touched on, it just stops. Every node just stops, and you'll go into depression, which then contradicts what they said 5 years ago that helps your mental state. So I sort of knew it was coming. The problem I had is I broke the world record. 2 days later, I was back in London, and then a day later was the royal wedding. I'd had two highs in 1 week, but the royal wedding overshadowed everything I'd done. All the TV and media was, what canapes did you eat and what champagne did you have? Was that really? I've just raised over $1.3 million and broken 2 world records. But so for me, that was disheartening in the fact that I didn't get an opportunity to sort of really appreciate what I'd achieved before I then went into the next high. But I knew it was coming. I knew there was going to be that sort of depression. We also had a big fundraiser 6 weeks later after me getting back in London. So I sort of focused my time on that, and that kept me busy. they do say that you're supposed to taper your
Right.
training, and because you're as a, your heart is a muscle, it grows. I think my resting heart rate was 41 beats a minute or something.
Wow.
And so there's risk of cardiac arrest. So I did do a bike ride. I went to a town about 10 miles away to the coffee shop, and then I cycled home, and then these cyclists spotted me and tried racing me. So I ended up shooting off and getting my PB. So I wasn't really tapering. But for me, when I cycle or whatever I do, I need to have an objective. And so for me, I didn't really have an objective on that bike ride. So I neglected the tapering process and just focused my time on this big fundraiser, which raised about £230,000 in London. So, but yeah, I knew it was coming, and because I knew it was coming, I was ready for it. But you speak to Olympians, people who do World Cups, and 4-year process, and it's over. Whether they've got the gold or not, it's
Right.
over, and then they have to start. Do they want to go through that whole process again for the next 4 years? So I knew it was coming, but I had almost short-term things to look forward to sort of keep myself busy.
And how long did it take for you to start thinking about what your next goal was going to be, your big goal?
Yeah, straight away I was looking for the next challenge. What is the next challenge? It wasn't cycling. I've enjoyed cycling. I've sort of ticked that box. It was like, what's the next challenge for me? I'd also lost a lot of weight. I was 90 kilos when I started, and I weighed 78. And I sort of joked with Alana, she didn't marry me because I looked like Chris Froome. So it had to be something that I could bulk up again. and something that I was, Dean Stott, the frogman, I love the water. So I thought something water orientated. So straight away, I already in my head, and I was also thinking about it on the bike ride. It wasn't when I'd finished; it was when I was on the bike ride as well. What else would I do after this? So my sort of plan was to then sort of kayak the length of the River Nile, the world's longest river. You've cycled the world's longest road. Let's now paddle the world's longest river. So yeah, it wasn't long before I sort of put that on paper and told the world I was going to do it.
And are you still thinking about doing something like that?
Yeah, very much so. Obviously, coronavirus has stalled everything. And since then, me and the family have now moved to America. Unfortunately, in a world that it doesn't matter how many world records or millions you've raised for charity, it's all about social media presence and things like that. So our sort of plan in 2022 is to build on that. So there's a few TV opportunities that have come my way, but I now sort of understand that what that does, that brings more eyes to you, which then brings more eyes to the challenge, and then you can then raise more money. But I know we didn't look, Alana and I didn't look beyond the bike ride. We didn't see it as a career in guest speaking or books or TV opportunities. We did it so I wasn't smuggling people across borders and burying weapons in the desert. So we weren't really ready either when we got back for it.
And you're a part of SAS Australia. And this is what I found really interesting, because in your book, you actually share that you were approached initially by the producer sort of all the way back then, but that, loyalty was very important to you, and what the sort of defense would say about you being part of such a program. What's changed for you since then to now in terms of feeling like now you're comfortable in stepping into that space?
So I got approached in 2015 from Minnow Films, who originally came up with the concept, and they said, look, your name keeps coming up. This is what we want to do. This is the show we want to do. Would you be interested? And for me, all I had visions of, there was a show back in the 90s called SAS Tough Enough. It was horrendous. So all I thought of was that. And I said, look, I like the idea of the show. I've got a few friends who'd be interested, Rang Ant and Foxy, worked perfectly for them in their times in their life. I then got a letter from the military a week later telling me to step away, which I did. Again, it was that loyalty thing, and I didn't want to upset the group. But it went on to be a great show, great success, and now I was in Australia. What's happened since is then I still had anonymity. I was still flying under the radar. I was still evacuating people from countries. For me, it wouldn't look right. I wouldn't be able to do those jobs as well as be on TV. Like, isn't that guy from whatever? So I stepped away, whereas now, you know, you are a public figure, you've got world records, you've got a book and things like that. So your anonymity is gone. And so it's a different time in our life. And as I said before, you know, it helps, you know, your media profile, which then helps future challenges as well. So yeah, a lot's happened in those 6 years.
Yeah, because we were actually speaking about this before I press record, sort of this, we both related to each other, this balance of sort of trying to get, you know, your outcome across and your awareness across of what is important to you, but also not, you know, heavily pulled towards this social media of uploading every day and 5 stories every day. And I think, you know, being on television shows, I was on Australian Survivor many years ago, about 5 years ago, but, you know, if it happened now or something like that, like it does really help, like put yourself out there as a public figure and then gives you that platform to be able to kind of speak about what you want to speak about, or go out and, you know, do the kayaking along the Nile. Like it does really help, but it's about being able to, I think, remain authentic throughout this experience. And I think, you know, throughout these experiences, as I'm sure you're experiencing, it's like, you know, you do come up against these challenges where you have to be really on the ball in this kind of space to stay true to you, but also to kind of step into a space that you're new to.
Yeah, it's definitely put me out of my comfort zone, you know. So for me, in the Special Forces, social media was a taboo. You know, we weren't on it. And it's almost like you've now total flipped that you actually need this to help promote what you're doing and things like that. But also on a personal one for me is that relationship with Prince Harry. I'm known as Prince Harry's Special Forces friend, regardless. Whatever I do, I'm always asked about him and I'm always asked about the Special Forces, which is fine. But I've got my own story. And it's like, you know what I mean? I single-handedly evacuate people. You know, we just evacuated hundreds out of Afghanistan in the last few months. You know, we're still doing it, still very much involved in that. But all people are interested in is this relationship you have with a former prince. And it's like, really? But I sort of just have to sort of take that on the chin, and, you know, that will always be there. You know, you'll always be asked about the Special Forces, but try and use that platform to get your message through about, you know, doing good, helping other people. And that's something that me and Lana are really keen on is that philanthropy side.
Quite fascinating, isn't it? As you shared, like, you know, you come out with sort of 2 world records and people are asking you about your canapes. Like it says a lot about, you know, what people focus on, unfortunately. Yeah.
Exactly. You know, you just raised, you know, £930,000, but, you know, what did you, you know, what you're wearing? So, but it's just, you know, people have different views, but it's something it does sometimes. I just get used to it now. You know, I'm like, okay, people will always be fascinated in that sort of side. But if you can use that to still get your message across and still get your voice through the noise, then you'll achieve it.
Yeah, it's a massive part of it, isn't it? It obviously helped you initially at the start a lot. So yeah, it's just about sort of coming into your own throughout that experience now. And obviously you're doing that with, you know, being a part of television shows and all sorts of things that you're a part of now and coming into for 2022.
Yeah, no, it's good. And thing for me, you know, it's a great show in Australia. It's watched by many. So I'm very fortunate to come in and slot into something that's already a huge success rather than taking the gambles.
Yeah, it's true.
It's the right time for me now, yeah.
So Dean, you talk about unrelenting pursuit of excellence. And I absolutely love this. And I would love you to share more about, like, for the listeners today, how can you bring that more into your life on a day-to-day basis? Because I think why I love focusing on the day-to-day is because obviously, you know, your days build up and they form, like it's more about the system than the goal itself. And not everybody has a big goal or, you know, something like a world record that they're working towards, but it might be just in the sense of how they show up for their family or their friends or their creativity, whatever it is. It doesn't have to just be sort of sport related. What is underlying pursuit of excellence mean to you, and how do you apply that in your life?
So the unrelenting pursuit of excellence, that's one of the ethoses of the Special Forces. But what's great about that ethos, I don't just see it in the Special Forces or in sport, it's in anything you do, whether you work in finance, whether you're a carpenter, whether you're a mother or a father, you know, just it's the approach to everything that you do, that you do it to the best of your ability. You can look at yourself in the mirror at the end of the day and say, I've given it my all. I couldn't have done any better. But we're human beings. We're always learning. We always make mistakes as well. You know, one of the other great things about the military one of the reasons the best special forces in the world isn't because we've got the best caliber of guys in the training, is we're always learning and evolving. And so we used to do a thing called a hot debrief, and I tend to do that with myself and Alana at the end of the week. And it was like, what worked, what didn't work, and if we were to do it differently, do it again, what would we do differently? Nice. And so, as long as you're always evolving and just striving to be the best you can be. I'm not saying go cycle 14,000 miles, go ludicrous. Even if you want to go for a 2K walk or whatever, because everyone has different abilities. What my heart is compared to others, it would be two totally different things, but we're still pushing ourselves to our extremes. It's just our extremes are slightly different. So yeah, that's it. It's just that you can look in the mirror and know that you've given it your all, and you're always striving to push yourself and become better. And that's me at the moment with my daughter teaching me on social media. Not my comfort zone.
Yeah, I absolutely love that you shared even about the 2 kilometer walk, because I think we can all compare, and when, as you shared, it's like this 14,000 mile bike ride, it's kind of like, if 2Ks is sort of your big thing, it's hard to even take pride in that. But I love the idea of like, if 2K walk is like your challenge for the day, like you lean into that and you make it bloody excellent. Like you give it your all, and you finish that with a sense of pride that you gave it your all. And I think that's a really beautiful way to live.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then also look at, once you've achieved that, what can you do next? So a lot of people, I think, where they're hard on themselves. Someone was training for a marathon, for example, and never done a marathon before, 26 miles. They'll try and do 26 miles straight away, not achieve it, and then just be totally deflated. When in fact you should start at the basics, do 2 kilometers, then you do 3, and then build on it. You're building yourself physically and mentally as well. But yeah, a lot of people sort of try for the end goal, fail, and then think that's it, they can't do it. It's understanding it's a progress.
And I know that family is really important to you, so this is where I'd love to end. You have Molly and Tommy as your children. What do you hope that they learn from you most, or what do you hope that they take away from you, sort of standing as the man that you are today, from everything that you achieved? What do you hope that they're learning from you?
I think they hope, from me and Alana, that, anything's possible. Anything you set your mind to is possible. We want them to obviously help in the philanthropy world, understand that they're very lucky. The amount of times I tell them that, I only had 1 pudding each year, and things like that. So for me, it's just those sort of traits from the mother and father. Alana and I always want to help people, whether it's in charity work, whether it's evacuating people out of Afghanistan or what. So hopefully they can take that forward. But, I would never tell Molly or Tommy that they would last 2 minutes or they wouldn't be able to achieve it.
Right.
The fact that, as we touched on, the fact that I still mention it 26 years on and for me, I've really realized, especially with this whole period working in the mental health sector, the words are quite powerful, actually very powerful actually. So for me, conscious of what I say or what we say to them and how that can affect, their behavior.
Well, Dean, thanks so much for this wonderful conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed reading your book, Relentless. It was a beautiful story. It's probably one of the few stories that I actually feel like, in sharing your sense of achievement, you involved your family so much throughout why you were able to. And I think that is such a beautiful aspect to who you are. I think that's certainly something you should be proud of. And for someone like me, a reader and a follower of your journey, it was, I truly have a lot of respect for you in sharing that. So thank you so much, Dean.
My pleasure. I genuinely believe that anyone can break a world record if you have that right support network. I luckily had Alana, who's running the businesses, sorting the mortgage out and things like that. All I had to do was just cycle a bike. So I had the easiest part of the challenge. Yeah.
It does sound easier when you put it like that.
Yeah, it is easier.
So Dean, I'd love to ask you, on a final note, what does it mean to you to be human?
Me to be human, feel like, be thankful for every day, to be human, always be happy, as we touched on, Alana, I always want to help people. I think to be human, you need to be kind. I think at the moment when you turn the TV on, it's very toxic and things like that. Don't get pulled into any of that. Just remember about humanity. And more recently, I've seen it on such a grand scale with what we've been doing in Afghanistan, you know, and it's not covered, you know, the good things in the world and humanity isn't covered on the media, but it is there. It's those working behind the scenes. You know, you don't do it for the glory, you do it because it's the right thing to do.